Hello and welcome to that's a bloody skin shot. Welcome to another one of our weekly wine geekery chats. How you doing, Fred? We are tonight. Oh, there we go. Looks like we're on now. Hello, welcome to another one of our weekly wine geekeries, and we are going to be discussing, talking about, drinking, exploring three of the main seven regions or areas that can be designated from this little area, not little, but the area of Tuscany in Italy that we all know as Chianti. So that's one of the starting points. Is actually, you know what though, it's therapeutic. Again, we always think white wine. I kind of among the belief world, I guess, that white wine, even fantastic Orvieto from Italy, is in my world, in my experience, is for what I'm cooking, when I'm eating stuff that goes with it, or when I'm thinking about what red wines I'm going to have. So I think we should always keep that in mind as we are drinking our wines and getting ready. So I've got a nice, really delicious Orvieto. Again, this is Italian wine, so we're looking at Chianti tonight, but I wanted to have a cool, really super inexpensive, really great Italian wine that is kind of traditional, but not a lot of people have had it. It's the wine itself is called Orvieto. It's probably backwards. I don't know if you see that or not. And so Orvieto is a region, and then within this region, there's a small, the best, the oldest vines. They call that Classico, and you might even be able to see. The Orvieto is not the grape, so that's one of the things that gets a little bit confusing again. Whoa, when we talk about Italian wines, is we often in America we go get a cab. The grape, it's a cab. In Italy, it's not that way. Even though we all think of, and it's not really wrong, but we all think of, like, for instance, Chianti as like a type of wine, but it's really it is a type of wine. We know it as a type of wine because there's this region in Italy that's called Chianti, and they make this particular style of wine. So we call it Chianti. But Chianti actually is a designated area that you could think of in France. You might ask for Bordeaux, and when you're asking for a Bordeaux, that means you know, and then you might be more wine geeky or wine knowledgeable, or you know what you like, and you might ask for a left bank or right bank or something. You get a little bit more specific, but it's all based on what the grapes are. The same thing is Chianti. We know of Chianti just as a red wine, and there's like the history. We can talk about that, but the reality is Chianti is a place, and within Chianti, there's seven primary ways in which it can be designated. So think of it from big to small, Italy, right? And then within Italy, there's this cool area called Tuscany, which is where we get some of the great wines of the world. It's where Brunellos come from. It's where Vino Nobile di Montepulciano. It is the home of the Sangiovese grape, the single most important grape in Italy. It makes up those wines. It's also the primary, or sometimes now with new regulations, it could be the entire makeup of the Chianti. A traditional classic Chianti, it has some other things blended into it. But Sangiovese itself is the grape of Tuscany. It's the grape really of Italy in terms of production, of style, of importance, of magnitude. It's in everything from simple, everyday, below table wines, right? So this most inexpensive wines you can get young, not very sophisticated, but still usually very drinkable. Sangiovese, often it's younger than putting it into, say, a Chianti in some of the regions of Chianti, or it could be outside any sort of demarcated region, and so it just gets called Sangiovese. There's much less regulation on just the straight grape, so they can do much more with it, and they can do much more with the Sangiovese grape by not having to be constrained within a particular government-regulated brand, or sort of, we think it's easier. I think I like to think of it when I teach branding classes. I'm talking about a brand, a way in which we understand it. So Chianti has a lot of very specific regulations that used to be really rigid. There used to have to be a certain percentage of white wine in it, and that white wine made a real light fluffiness. And as it became lighter and sort of as they created that need that it had to have one part white wine, adding a little bit of white wine really does make a red wine, even a bolder red wine sometimes, much more drinkable. It adds a little bit of acidity. It makes it a little bit refreshing. And Sangiovese itself already has sort of a perceived backbone of like salinity or salt in it. And so when you add a white wine to it, that makes it really this refreshing, super food-friendly wine. But then, first of all, it's cheaper. The white wine additive is cheaper, but it dilutes the overall sort of almost meaning of what Chianti really meant at one time. And so as they became more popular and more widespread, we started seeing this move away from what was the way Chianti was made for a very long time, and it had this growth. And then it became known that the basket fiasco, which is it's also very funny. If you got the week we went deeper, what all those Italian wines that we used to see that came in the basket. In Italy, the name for that is a fiasco, the flat bottles that you could sit. I mean, who cared about the wine, right? They're going to drink it, but you bought it because it would be cool with melting all the different cool candles. I still have one or two of them. But the wine was not great. Some of it was, drinkable, but it wasn't great. It wasn't meant to be great. It was this kind of like, to me, it reminds me, and it's also sort of the same time, the difference between Liebfraumilch, which is a Blue Nun, that style of Riesling coming out of Germany that really had much less flavor and mostly just sweetness. Made with less expensive, easier to grow grapes, big, huge yields, lots of juice, not a lot of flavor. That's what was happening to Chianti. That was that same time they started sending much more of it to America. So Italian wine really took a big hit, and it wasn't taken seriously. It was thought of as the cheap spaghetti wine, and all sorts of negative names came about for it. And it slowly emerged and started coming back. One, as they started bringing in, for instance, these super Tuscans, these wines that were outside of the regulations, where they didn't even have to use Italian grapes. They would blend Italian grapes, Sangiovese, often with Merlot or Cabernet Sauvignon, and we get these really interesting, very drinkable, very American palate. We call them Parker pleasers. Really hits all of those buttons, kind of like sweetness, very soft, missing the dirt and that sort of little bit of funk style that you get out of some traditional Italian wines. So that's kind of where we are in Chianti. The idea is Chianti's a region that produces this very traditional style of wine. We're getting back to see the broadness of the tradition, primarily based in Sangiovese. Classic styles, we'll add a couple of other grapes to it. And so we're going to just taste through it. First, this Orvieto is just great. $12 a bottle, $11 a bottle. And it is with the reason why I wanted to use it, by the way, is one of the wines in here, the grape Trebbiano, is one of the white wines that was often and still is often the white blend that goes into the Chianti. I knew there was a reason why all that was going to come together at one point. Okay, so first of all, this is a Classico, so it's like a step up. It's produced in the oldest piece of, again, a region, Orvieto, where they have the longest vines that produce the smallest yield, but you get a much more rich sense out of it. And this is a very, very inexpensive wine with big, big flavor, and it's got a nice mediumness, so it's not a big, full, heavy wine, but it does have, it has some grit while you're drinking it. There's something to it. Super refreshing. It has this really, as you get from Trebbiano, and the other white grape in this is Grechetto. I think if you have the tasting notes, I don't know what it says, but I know there's the grapes in there, you can tell. But very, very nice acid, but not like this super tart. You get a little bit of peach flavor. So really great, easy, simple, refreshing kind of wine. Really good with not just seafood, that's kind of a generic catch-all, but this particular one I think is really great with maybe like a Mexican inspired grilled fish that might have some citrus or lime on it, or even something that might have peaches. I don't know, maybe grilled peaches next to it, because it's got a nice really kind of interesting, fresh, actually not fresh, like ripe peach flavor on the finish that kind of lingers. Um, yeah, really, that's a really great Orvietto. That blend, again, it's a blend. Many of these wines are going to be blends. Most traditional, all Chiantis are actually blends. Sangiovese with a few of these other grapes, Cannellolo, excuse me, um, and Trebbiano is part of white wine. So what we're going to do tonight is the wines. If you're following the sheet, it starts with a Chianti Classico. So Tuscany, Chianti, sub-region Classico. So Classico sounds like a descriptor, like calling it classic or something. There's a few reasons for that, but the reality is it actually just means a place within the Chianti region. And then the descriptor, and this is a way that you can start to learn how to read a bottle. So, or if I can show you it. It says Chianti Classico, so that's the description of where it's from, and then below it, if there is something to it, if you can see just there, that's Reserva, so that's the description of the wine. That's sort of, one is sort of a descriptive, here's where it comes from, like a quantitative, what it is, an objective description of it. The other is qualitative, it is a Reserva style of wine from the Classico region. Reserva just means, we're not going to get real technical because I've already kind of gone on a bit. It just means that it has been aged in oak longer. It has very specific, again, there's regulations for using specific terms in anywhere in Italy. And Reserva just means it spends an additional time in oak. This one, I think it's 36 months is what this one is in oak, and it's French and Hungarian oak. Another thing that you can look at, if you want to know that it's from Chianti, there's a really great story, but that can take the rest of the show. You see, it's going to have this rooster on it. It has to be from Classico to have the rooster on it, and that goes back to the old story about how Chianti was sort of established, where the zones came from, two sort of battling villages. They began a race from one end to the other when the cock crowed, so what's what this guy's on there for? And whichever runner, whenever they met, each side got however far they were. So there's a whole story that goes into that. So this to me, I think is it's $20. It is from Clement 7 Classico Reserva. It's very much traditional. What I expect. No, it's not really traditional in the blend, but I think it's what many of us expect out of the Chianti today. So it's really, I think, we should think of this more as sort of progressive or new. Because it's 100% Sangiovese, at least it's labeled that way. So to be an actual traditional style, it would have to include these other grapes that I was talking about, certain percentages. But this, to me, so the oak really comes out even just on the waft, right? So this one needs a breeze. So I opened this about 2 hours ago, but this waft is still got a lot of oak to it. The oak is really present with some cinnamon and a little bit of like baseball glove, like not super strong leather, not like you're biting into shoe leather. You just sort of get like a really hint of that. It spends, I think it's, so the oak is like the larger oak barrels. So one of the things they do that's, again, not really traditional, but I think it brings out the traditional flavor. They keep it in these really large, more like Italian style barrels for 24 or 36 months, or for 2 years. And then for the last 12 months, after it's concentrated down a little bit, they take that wine and then it spends 12 months in French barriques, which are very small barrels. So if you think of the first part, it's aging and oak, but there's much less sort of like oak contact with the wine right there. So if you think about it, it's like a big giant barrel where the oak has some effect and it's going to add some flavor, but you take that same amount and put it in a whole bunch of little barrels where there's a ton of oak contact. The oak is going to have a much more intense sort of action happening. It's going to provide much more feel, it's going to provide much more nose, and it's going to provide much more flavor. Sometimes the oak, depends what style oak, this is French oak, sometimes it can add a little bit of toastiness, sometimes doing it that way, we get out of California and with some of the additives that they do, really moves in that chocolatey mocha direction. The viscosity can change. But this really, one thing it does, it really affects the nose. I know I keep saying that, right? but the oak is, um, it's big and present and full, but it's not dominating. It's much there, but it still allows for. It's kind of the oak is accented by some blackberry, but in the middle palate, the some fruit kind of really expands and it feels almost juicy. So it's not like that heavy, long mouth feel that you get sometimes from very oaky, not ready to be drunk yet wine. And this is still young. This could actually age. It's got some the tannin. That tannic activity is pretty heavy, but it's not like super biting. It allows. It's not that kind of drying tannins that some people think about, where you kind of feel like you're pulling cotton out of your mouth as you're talking afterwards, right? This one, I mean, there's some heavy stuff happening. But first of all, if I was biting into a piece of pizza, even something like that's got a lot of flavor and some red sauce, or a steak, it would be like, yes, that's a great thing. Um, but yeah, I think I went like something, like my buddy's mom's used to make kind of pasta marinara, kind of just awesomeness. Oh yeah, that would be what you'd want. Some kind of like really great Italian pasta dish, because this fact the oak in this, it really gives that kind of robust feel, but the flavor is not super oaky. There's still a lot of the other flavors there. It's really great, well made wine. So that's from the Classica region. That's where most of us, if it's not just generally appellated as Chianti, which means it comes from anywhere and or everywhere within the Chianti demarcated zone. Um, the most popular, and I think because it just seems to make the most sense when we hear it, Classico sounds much more descriptive of the quality rather than sort of the location. Um, the next one I think is possibly the most sort of significant, um, and it's only because it is, first of all, it's kind of weird. It's not all just one piece, but the area that's called it's a weird one pronounced too. Colisenese, S-E-N-S-E, S-I. Um, but it kind of moves around when you look at the way that region. It shares so much landscape with some of the big sort of brand names that I was talking about earlier. It shares pieces of landscape and borders and bumps up against the region from where we get Brunello and from the region from where we get Vino Nobile de Montepulciano. Those are both Sangiovese. So this is the prime, one of the best areas in the entire world to get Sangiovese from the same basic or very similar landscape. That's where we're getting these fantastic Brunellos and these other amazing Sangiovese-based wines. And so when we get a Chianti from this region, there's all sorts of room for it to be just outrageously good. And it's not as well known, so there's a great value to be found here. So this one, and we'll do it again. So this one is, the brand is, the name of it is La Serra. There's probably a whole bunch of other stuff, but La Serra, Chianti region, more specific region, Colisenese. Um, and you notice there wasn't any other descriptor, so it did not say Reserva or Gran Selezione. Those are the next two levels up. So this is just sort of, it's not just a fin de table. It's not just a table wine that would be just basic Chianti. It's a specific region, but it's not a Reserva. Much less time, much less oak presence. Super highlighting the quality of the fruit of the region. Many of the Coliseneses that we have or have had here are not Reservas, where they really let the fruit itself be the rock star. They don't spend 3 months in oak. Not that that's bad, because we actually have two. I think Mileto is a Reserva from the region. And oak still is fantastic. It does the same thing when it's a really great balance like the first one. But this is a really interesting contrast, first of all, from the Clement 7, and then from the following one that we're going to have from Rufina, which is also a Reserva. And that's what I was starting with. This is not a traditional tasting where you might build up in flavor. Actually, I have this very fruity one kind of in the middle, so we're seeing there's a really sort of a significant difference between each one of these. If you go from really super oaky to really super oaky, I think you lose a little bit of the nuance of how the oak is treated, how the oak is working in the wine differently. This one isn't that, right? So this one is that really nice in between. So that means first, take a little bit extra sip at the beginning where you're not really going for the flavor of it. So what you're doing there is you're kind of um, washing the pellet away. It may still be there from the wine, but you want it to be like fresh when you taste it and think about it. You want it to you don't want it to be competing with the wine that you just had, especially because this is purposefully a big change, right? It's a contrast. This is not a slow progression like you often see. There's different ways in which we can organize wines for tasting, and this one was to be able to really see the contrast. So this one, the fruit is just dynamite. It grows almost like dynamic is not the right word. I'm glad I didn't say that, but it changes a little bit. It starts off and it just kind of it's almost like a cranberry, not super dark red like bitter, but it's got that like sweet cranberry without the orange flavor, but it's got that kind of flavor. It's like candied, I guess, cranberry, but then it becomes kind of juicy in the mid palate, but it remains full. There's this juiciness where it kind of you really. What's cool about this is if you kind of get slow, you really see it kind of change. You really notice it's kind of an interesting, nice. You think you're going to like it as you get the first sip, and then all of a sudden it kind of changes, like it's a whole different thing happening. That isn't going to happen just on the first sip because you're still going to have a little bit of that feel from the caramel left in your mouth. Yeah, this is one to sort of allow yourself to enjoy because if you swish it around a bit, it really feels sort of significant. I think is the way. There's a lot happening, and it's just again like um, excuse me, one of the things that we think about Chianti is there's this like slouch in the direction of having some like almost saltiness, like salinity, a little bit of minerality, but it's not really there. There isn't any of that really in it, but it gives you that impression. Um, that's why these wines are so good with food, or we don't know which the food that we eat goes well with this. And again, so these two worlds, the eating, the culinary world of this part of Italy, grew up with the wine, and both of them kind of changed. Humans changed them to be the best together in a country like Italy, where wine and food are not separate ideas. It's like music and dancing. One often demands the other, creates the other, if it isn't there almost. But they are better with each other, and that is wine and food from Italy. So now we're going to have our third one. Let's take a look again at the label, learning about Italian wine. Really, it's a label game. It's always going to be some sort of unpronounceable Italian words that are names that we're not going to we're going to say them wrong or sound weird doing it. This is Napozzano or Friscobaldi, and it is, see the words that we look for right here, the Chianti Rufina. So Chianti from Rufina, and then up here, Reserva. So again, where it's from, the place is Rufina. So the three places we talked about are Classico, Colli Senese, and then this one is Rufina. Rufina is the smallest of all of the different regions, but it really has it's a base of this mountain, right in the foothills, where it gets cool breezes that come in, and it's also protected by the mountains. So I think that in my opinion, I love Chianti. It's sort of my first love of wine. I think Rufina provides the fantastic, outstanding wines, but also the best value because people have heard of Colli Senese almost as much as they've heard as Chianti, Classico, but Rufina just sort of falls into one of those other ones. But the wine is outrageous. It's small, but it's got some big houses here, The Fresco Baldi makes a great product. They have levels going up much higher. This one is Reserva again, so it means it's got at least 3 years, 36 months in oak. But this is different, so it is only 50% of it goes into barriques. The rest stays the whole time. Um, Totally different style notes, right? So we're going from fruit back to a Reserva. There's much more oak present, but the oak treatment here does a much different thing. First of all, there's not a huge piece of it on the nose. It's just there, but it's the first one smells oaky. This one's not an oaky smell. Much more um, the aromas that come off are a little bit more like lavender um, or something like that. Yeah, like some kind of like more like not specifically just broadly floral. I think it's more like lavender, which tells you what the wine is going to be like a little bit. Um, there's what's I think is interesting about this that makes it a little bit different than some other Chiantis. There's a little bit more presence. Like it has the red fruit, a little bit of cherry, maybe pomegranate, maybe that type of fruit, like a red kind of fruit, or maybe blackberry. Those three things kind of together. But it also has a really interesting blueberry flavor, um, and maybe it gets like if you really try to pick it apart, that finish it like moves in the direction of being sweet. I mean, it's almost tart, really, but the fruit changes what it is. That blueberry mix you might almost think of it as a little bit like a currant, so maybe it's a currant blueberry. But there's like I guess the point is there's if you really kind of slow, it gets a little parching. You get this is a little bit more grippy tannins. But if you do it a little bit slow and kind of let it sit there and think about it, you really get a notice of almost like a breakdown where they kind of start to grow a few different kinds of fruit flavor. And the black that cherry juicy blackberry piece, and then the blueberry might be currant. It's not really sweet. Currant does make it seem sweet, but there's like a extra flavor that's not really just that bramble blackberry raspberry type of flavor. But then it kind of that's not really overpowering. So I wouldn't necessarily call this a super fruity wine, but it has those flavors with a really nice kind of beef of oak. The Barrique, the first one, kind of mellows. The oak becomes more there, but what happens with it? It adds almost like a softer piece of vanilla. That's not happening here. So the oak remains a little bit kind of heavier. But what's interesting is this really cool kind of softening, like balsamic vinegar, like this balsamic, like thicker. But don't think even the vinegar. Think of like the thick stuff that you put with. But it becomes like a rounding piece. It sort of rounds it out a little bit. Word there. And then it just kind of becomes soft and supple in your mouth, and it really ends with this nice dry, soft bit, but it's pretty soft. Still kind of, you feel just a touch of that parchiness, which you don't, you only do, I only am doing it because I'm not eating with it. That the parchiness is something that what's happening is there's enough acidity that it sort of is washing your mouth, like cleansing it for the next bite. So if I was eating anything, especially something that paired really well with something rich, something red, when I did it today, I had a pizza primo, just their classic pizza. I don't know what it is. Maybe that's just what they just know me. And that's what I'm bringing. But it was perfect with that. A lot of rich heavy flavors, and that feel. If it's by itself, that feel that you get, it seems kind of overly parching. That's a good thing. That's the thing that says I am great with food. So that is, and this is great with food. And it's also $20. All these are really great values. It's a very high-end feeling wine that you get at $20. Not that I don't think $20 is a throwaway price of a bottle, but it's definitely feels like, wow, I'm glad this is a glass of wine I'm drinking. Okay, that is our exploration of three of our favorite pieces of Chianti. Next week, we're going to move in, kind of do something not exactly the same, but we're exploring fun French finds. I begin with alliteration and work out from there. Now, the idea is some really cool wines that you might not explore because they are different regions or grapes you may not have heard of, or wines that are not the traditional, the basic ones that we've seen. So different areas, different pieces, different parts of France next week in our fun French finds. See you then. Thanks. Have a good weekend.